Nuevamente, muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Quiero explicarles un poco cómo vamos a llevar la sesión. Eh, Raj nos va a hacer la presentación. Si tienen alguna duda sobre lo que está presentando en ese momento, si necesitan clarificar algún concepto o algo, por favor hagan sus preguntas. Si es alguna pregunta como más genérica o que requiere una explicación más amplia, les vamos a pedir que hagan las preguntas al final de la sesión. Pueden hacer las preguntas directo ustedes, levantando la mano en inglés, o si no se sienten muy seguros de hacer las preguntas en inglés, no se preocupen, escríbanlas en el chat en español y nosotros las traducimos y se las leemos. Eh, Sin más que explicar, les platico muy rápido. El día de hoy nos está presentando el doctor Raj Raghunathan. Él es profesor de la Escuela de Negocios de la Universidad de Texas, es profesor de marketing y es creador de un popular curso en Coursera sobre felicidad con 200,000 estudiantes. Su investigación sobre decisiones y felicidad ha sido destacada en medios como The New York Times y es autor del libro If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy? Y escribe el blog Sapient Nature. Eh, Sin más que decirles, pues entonces le doy la palabra al doctor Raj. Raj, thank you very much for being here. I already explained the rules, so if you want to start, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. I hope you can see my slides. If you could give me a thumbs up. Okay, wonderful. So thank you very much for that very kind introduction, Marcella, even though I did not understand even a word. Actually, I understood a few words. And I could tell that you were talking about my Coursera course and my book and all those things. Um, so I want to talk to you all a little bit about the relationship between happiness and success. And in particular, I want to talk a little bit about this idea of what I call the great happiness sabotage. Essentially, the idea is that people often undermine their own happiness, they lower their own happiness. And this is especially interesting because this is more prevalent among the people who are really successful, people who have earned a lot of money, who have become high in status, are famous, are powerful, etc. So it's intriguing that people who have achieved what a lot of us want, right? Especially when we are students. Of course, younger students than you all, but I teach at the University of Texas. So undergraduate students, for example, who are 18, 19, 20 years old, who want to be successful, and part of the reason why they want to be successful is because they think that that success is going to make them happier. But if in fact that success comes in the way of happiness, then it's kind of intriguing at the very least, perhaps even disturbing. Okay, so let me jump into this topic. And I want to start with a message that I think is very prevalent across the world. It certainly was something that I was very exposed to when I was growing up. And the message was, and this came from my parents, for example, and from my teachers and from my well-wishers, from my mentors, my uncles and aunts and everyone, neighbors, was that, hey, Raj, you have to work really hard. You have to work really hard right now because once you work really hard and get good grades and get a good job and make a lot of money and buy a home and drive a nice car, then after that you can just relax. You can be happy for the rest of your life, right? So the idea is that success, defined in terms of conventional success, that is wealth, power, money, fame, etc., is going to lead you to be happy. And it is worth sacrificing your current happiness levels and go through some anxiety and stress and everything like that in order to achieve that success. Because once you do achieve that success, you can relax and you can be happy for the rest of your life. So this is a message that we've been exposed to a lot as we are growing up. And I will get back to the relationship between success and happiness in just a moment. But I do want to talk a little bit about the reverse direction of causality, right? So happiness to success. So what do we know about this direction of causality? And it turns out there's actually quite a few studies showing that happier people are likely to be more successful. And at first blush, when you first come across these studies and this theme, it might actually be surprising because a lot of us believe that it is when we are really anxious, right, that we work very hard. And I'm sure that you've had many instances in which a deadline is suddenly there and you haven't worked towards completing a project, for example, and now the deadline is tomorrow or day after tomorrow or maybe next week. It's really close. And then, you start to feel anxious. You start to have that adrenaline rush that helps you stay awake through the night and work hard and finally push the project over the hill, right? Um, Over the finish line. And certainly, there are many instances in which stress and anxiety and insecurity, perhaps, maybe even jealousy or envy, can really make us work very, very hard. Okay. And so, this idea that happiness promotes success might seem like a little bit of a strange thing. And many of us might believe that when we are happy, we don't really feel like working because we have everything that we need, right? That's why we're happy. And so we are not as motivated. But it turns out when you have these kinds of hypotheses, you're not sure, which way it's going to go. It's best to test them. And a lot of researchers have tested the hypothesis. And what they find consistently is that happier people are likely to be more successful, particularly in the long run, not just tomorrow, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year from now, but over a 20, 30 year career. It's the happier people who are more successful. And so why is that the case? Um, it turns out that there's many reasons why happier people are more successful. One reason is that happier people are healthier. Happier people have better functioning immune systems. They have better functioning cardiovascular systems. They have better functioning respiratory systems. They therefore show up for work more often, right? If you're unhappy, then chances are that if you get a cold, you're going to take 1 day more to get over that cold. You're going to be sicker for a little bit longer, right? And so you start to take more sick leave. And that starts to affect your productivity at work, right? Because you need to show up at your workplace in order to be productive. In fact, there was one study that showed in the United States that on average, unhappy employees take 16 more sick days in a year than happy employees, right? 16 more days, which is a big number. We have about 250 working days, right? Out of which we're allowed in the US about 10 days for vacation, right? 2 weeks. That's all we get in the United States usually on vacation. If you're sick, sorry, if you're unhappy and you take 16 more days of sick leave, that is 1.5 times the amount of time of vacation to be absent from work. So it's a big, big number. Okay, that's one reason why happiness promotes success, just because happier people are healthier, they show up for work more often. Happier people are also more collegial, right? And this may not come as a big surprise to many people. If you ask yourself, who would I like to work with? Who would I like to partner with in my project, in my team? Most people would choose somebody who's lighthearted, who has a good sense of humor. Even if you're doing something very serious, they don't take themselves too seriously, right? And the big advantage with working with people who are like that is that if you do notice something that they can improve, right? Maybe when they make presentations, they take too long to get to the main point of the presentation. You can kind of tell them, hey, listen, I love everything you do, but you seem to kind of go a little bit longer than you need to sometimes. And can you just kind of like scale that back a little bit, right? And they will probably take it in the right spirit. And they'll take it as constructive feedback rather than critical feedback and actually make changes. But if you have people who are generally anxious, generally stressed out, and generally angry, then you may not want to share your feedback with them because you don't know how they're going to take it, right? Because they're already angry and upset about the world. And so they might actually, take out their anger at you. And so it turns out that in teams in which everyone's a little bit happier, there is more kind of um, feedback sharing and there's more cooperation in terms of achieving the goals and so on and so forth. And so that's another reason why happiness promotes success. And the third reason has to do with how individuals, when they're happier, tend to make decisions. It turns out that happier individuals generally tend to see the big picture a little bit more, right? They're not so concerned with the details and the nitty-gritties. They kind of can step back a little bit and look at, okay, where are we heading with our organization? What is the long-term goal? And there's a lot of research showing that happier people tend to take a bigger view of things. They're also more objective. And I have some work of my own on this. Happier people tend to be more creative. So there's a lot of reasons why happiness promotes success. And if all of this isn't very convincing, there is another kind of piece of research that looks at the relationship between happiness and success, right? And for you to understand this, you have to imagine this graph in your mind's eye. I don't have it on the slide, but basically it's a inverse U relationship, like an arch, right? So imagine this arch, like the St. Louis arch, if you've seen it, right? Inverse U, U kind of flipped upside down, and on the y-axis of this graph, right? This arch is like a graph. The y-axis is productivity, right? And the x-axis is stress, right? And so what this inverse U relationship suggests is that people are most productive when they are at a medium level of stress. Too low and too high stress is not very good for productivity, right? So it's at the medium level of stress that people are most productive, and that might seem on the at first blush to go against this idea that happiness promotes success. But if you kind of think more carefully about this graph, what it suggests is that when people are feeling really, really low on stress, they're kind of uninterested in the work, right? They don't really care how it goes. That's why they're not stressed at all. Um, on the other hand, if people are really stressed out and they can't sleep well because of the stress, and their relationships are bad and their health is bad, then they can't think well either, right? And so you can understand why low, really low, and really high levels of stress is not very good, and medium levels of stress is good. Now, the question is, you have to ask yourself at work, where are your levels of stress? At what levels of stress are you generally operating? If you look back to the past year, and ask yourself, and you can kind of type out in the chat box, right? On average, right, your stress was really, really low, right? Then please type out in the chat box low, LOW, right? On average in the past year, when you look at it, on average, no, there's no stress. I was just like, it was a walk in the park every day, go to work. Oh, it's like laughing and smiling. There's no stress at all. On the other hand, if you had high levels of stress in the past year at work, then type out HIGH, high. Okay. On the other hand, if you had medium levels of stress, then maybe type out medium. But I really want to know on average, were you more likely to be in a high stress situation at work or a low stress situation at work? So that's what I want you to type out. Okay. So I'm going to wait for just a minute just to see what you type out. In the past year at work, did you have on average very low levels of stress? If so, type out low. If you had high levels of stress, please type out high. I'm going to give you guys about 15 seconds to do this. Okay, Marcella says medium. High. All right, there's another medium. All right, maybe I'll give it another minute. Right. Guess we have how many participants? 28. Maybe give it another 5 or 6 seconds because I do want to make sure that I get to all the material that I want to cover here. All right. So we have one high and two mediums levels of stress. Okay, I can tell you that, in the United States, the overwhelming majority would say that they had high levels of stress. Okay. So it's good at some level that you guys, uh, you know, uh, the most popular answer here is medium, although I don't know how representative it is because it's only two people who are saying medium and only three people have responded to this question, right? So if everybody were to respond, I don't know if this would be representative. But the idea being that when work is very stressful, when on average people are very stressed and people say that, they were more likely to experience high levels of stress than medium or low levels of stress in that graph, they're already starting out at the right end of the graph, right? High levels of stress. And so that's where happiness becomes very important. That happiness becomes like a buffer. It becomes like a thing that cancels out the high levels of stress, that makes the otherwise very high levels of stress at work a little more manageable, right? I hope this makes sense. So, in other words, it's not happiness directly that's improving your productivity, but because happiness lowers the otherwise really high levels of stress that people deal with, it brings them, because the happiness plus the stress adds up to bring them to a moderate level of stress that then makes them quite productive. Okay, so what I've touched on up to now is this idea that we're all, or many of us are exposed to this belief that if you are successful, you're going to be happy. Uh, but, what is the real relationship between happiness and success, or success and happiness? Does success in fact lead to increasing happiness, or does it in fact lower happiness? I'm going to get to that question. But meanwhile, I've talked a little bit about how happiness improves chances of success. Okay, so let's get back to this question of the relationship between success and happiness. What I want to share with you is that, in fact, a lot of the research, what it shows is that if you're not careful, um, success can actually lower happiness levels, make you unhappy rather than make you happy. Okay, so I want to share with you three reasons why this is the case. And one reason has to do with what happens when you become successful, what happens when you become rich, what happens when you become powerful. It turns out that people generally, when they become richer, tend to get at some level addicted to that wealth. They get addicted to power. They get addicted to status. They get addicted to being in control and so on and so forth. And so they start chasing superiority. Um, in one of the studies, we looked at people who were very successful versus not so successful. And we asked them to indicate how other people viewed them, right? And what we found is that if you're successful, you think that other people think that you are more funny, you are more smart, you're more accountable, you're more responsible, you're more good at making decisions, you're more likely to achieve your goals, and so on and so forth, which at one level might be accurate, might be objectively true. But what it also indicates is that the people who are successful have a more exalted view of themselves. And where is this view coming from? Why do people who are more successful think that they're funnier, for example, right? It comes from the feedback that other people around them are giving them. So in another study, we looked at the funniness of cartoons. And so we had these cartoons that participants evaluated. And in one set of conditions, we told the participants that these cartoons were made by somebody higher up in an organization, right? Like a CEO of an organization. In another condition, we told them that these cartoons were made by people lower down in the organization, somebody like a janitor level person. And we just asked these participants to rate the funniness of the cartoons. And what we found is that the same cartoon is rated as being more funny if the author of this cartoon is somebody higher up in the organization than somebody lower down. So imagine that you have become successful. You're a CEO of a company. What this means is that other people are going to laugh more at your jokes, right? They're going to take your word more seriously. If you give them a suggestion, they're probably going to take it as an order rather than just merely as a suggestion. But if, on the other hand, if you're at the same level of the other people in the organization or in a meeting, or in fact, you're lower down than them, right? You're an entry level manager and you're in a meeting with mid level managers or high level managers, then you might your jokes might not be treated as being as funny, right? So you may not think that other people respect you as much. And so what happens is that because we get feedback from other people that we are quote unquote superior, we start to believe that we are in fact superior. Not just that, we start to believe that it is our superiority to other people that is the reason for our success. And so we start to chase other yardsticks, other metrics, other symbols of superiority, including greater wealth and even more power, and so on and so forth. And it turns out that's a bad mistake when it comes to happiness, because if you chase superiority, that's almost guaranteed to lower your happiness levels. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And you can probably intuitively kind of relate to some of these reasons. One of these reasons has to do with um, how other people, how much other people like you when you chase superiority, right? People don't like you as much when you're chasing superiority. It also turns out that when you chase superiority, you can never be 100% happy in any moment, because if you do achieve a award or a success, you might be happy at that point when you achieve that success, but soon you're going to start to wonder, what about the next cycle? The next time there is a competition, there's the next time there is an award or a promotion. So you can never really rest on your past achievements. You're always going to be future focused, right? So that's what happens when you chase superiority. Okay, so that's one reason why success isn't very good for happiness. If you're not careful, it can make you start to chase superiority. That can lower your happiness levels. The second reason has to do with how people who are successful treat relationships. It turns out that if you particularly come into a lot of wealth, you start to deprioritize relationships. There's a uh, I think, very impactful and important set of studies conducted by this researcher called Paul Peff. He's at the University of California at Berkeley, who's looked at the relationship between wealth and altruism, right? Wealth and um, self-centered behavior, which is the opposite of altruism, or being mean, to other people. So let me just play you this video clip, and then I'll talk a little bit more about the results that he found.
Some of the first studies that we ran in this area looked at helping behavior, something social psychologists call prosocial behavior. And we were really interested in who's more likely to offer help to another person, someone who's rich or someone who's poor. In one of the studies, we bring in rich and poor members of the community into the lab and give each of them the equivalent of $10. And we told the participants that they could keep these $10 for themselves, or they could share a portion of it if they wanted to with a stranger who's totally anonymous. They'll never meet that stranger, and the stranger will never meet them. And we just monitor how much people give. Individuals who made $25, sometimes under $15,000 a year, gave 44% more of their money to the stranger than did individuals making $150,000, $200,000 a year. We've had people play games to see who's more or less likely to cheat to increase their chances of winning a prize. In one of the games, we actually rigged a computer so that die rolls over a certain score were impossible. You couldn't get above 12 in this game. And yet, the richer you were, the more likely you were to cheat in this game to earn credits toward a $50 cash prize, sometimes by 3 to 4 times as much. We ran another study where we looked at whether people would be inclined to take candy from a jar of candy that we explicitly identified as being reserved for children, participating. I'm not kidding. I know it sounds like I'm making a joke. We explicitly told participants, this jar of candy is for children participating in a developmental lab nearby. They're in studies. This is for them. And we just monitored how much candy participants took. Participants who felt rich took 2 times as much candy as participants who felt poor. We've even studied cars, not just any cars, but whether drivers of different kinds of cars are more or less inclined to break the law. In one of these studies, we looked at whether drivers would stop for a pedestrian that we had posed waiting across at a crosswalk. Now in California, as you all know, because I'm sure we all do this, it's the law to stop for a pedestrian who's waiting to cross. So here's an example of how we did it. That's our Confederate off to the left, posing as a pedestrian. He approaches as the red truck successfully stops. In typical California fashion, it's overtaken by the bus who almost runs our pedestrian over. Now here's an example of a more expensive car, a Prius, driving through, and a BMW doing the same. So we did this for hundreds of vehicles.
All right, I'm going to stop this here. But basically, the idea is that when you come into wealth, what these studies show is that you become a little more self-centered. And it's kind of an odd thing. Why would people become a little more self-centered when they become richer, right? And it's kind of interesting to think about some of the mechanisms. And one of the mechanisms is actually a physical mechanism, right? You just end up living in a bigger house, right? If you have more money, you might have a house with a compound wall around it. You might have your own swimming pool, maybe even your own movie theater, right? If you're really, really rich, maybe your own tennis courts and all that. You don't have to meet the common man or common person anymore as much, right? You can send out your servants or maid to go shopping. So physically, you're distancing yourself from other people. So that's part of the reason you can't relate to other people. And the second part is more psychological. I think that when you come into a lot of money, if you're not careful, you start to think of yourself as deserving more than other people do, right? And you're probably your lifestyle catches up too. You start to spend more money on fancy things and prestigious brands, and so on and so forth. And these things become more important to you, to your image, right? You become more materialistic, as a lot of the research shows, which makes you devalue other people more. And it turns out that relationships are perhaps the single most important determinant of your happiness. You can be the richest person in the world and the most powerful person in the world, but if you do not have intimate relationships, then you're guaranteed not to be very happy, right? So at the end of the day, we are human beings. We have a heart, we have emotions. It matters to us how healthy our relationships are. And so it's a very big mistake to make to distance yourself from other people just because you have money. Okay, it's probably the most the biggest mistake, the stupidest. I would even say the stupidest mistake you can make as far as happiness is concerned. Okay, let me talk about one last sin, and then I'm going to talk about how to avoid these sins, and then show you one last video, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So this last sin has to do with control seeking. Okay, when you are good at what you do, you're good at achieving your organization's goals, etc., you're obviously given more power, you're given more resources, you're given more people under you, you're given more money to achieve your goals, more resources, etc. So you're given more control, right? If you're not careful, what the studies show is that you can start to become addicted to all these ways of gaining control, right? You start to become even more control seeking. You start to become narcissistic, and it's my way or the highway kind of an attitude starts to creep into how you behave with other people. And so when other people don't do things that is to your liking, then you might, go to a relatively extreme extent to get rid of them, maybe fire them, or even in some ways punish them, and so on and so forth. And all of this is related to control-seeking behavior. And it turns out that this is not very good for happiness either. Okay, there's lots of reasons why control-seeking lowers happiness levels. I like to joke that life is like our ex-presidents and maybe our future presidents' hair. It's totally out of control. And so when you um, can only be happy when everything is working out really well, right? Life is under control, and you have a high desire for control, then you're definitely setting yourself up for a lot of unhappiness because life is, by definition, almost very unpredictable. Okay, that's the picture on the right side. And the picture on the left with this, cartoon figure walking on a tightrope, that has to do with this idea that, as I mentioned earlier, relationships are very important for us, right? And so unless we are in really good, healthy relationships, strong relationships, intimate relationships, we cannot really be happy. And it turns out that control seeking lowers the chances that other people like us, right? People don't like people who control them. In fact, there is even a term that psychologists use to refer to how when you're controlled by somebody else, somebody tries to control you, you will oppose it, right? You'll revolt against it. And that tendency is called psychological reactance, right? So we all exhibit psychological reactance when other people try to control us. Teenagers, for example, are famous for exhibiting psychological reactance. They perceive that their parents, elders, adults try to control them and try to not give them freedom. And so they revolt against it by showing their displeasure. Okay. Of course, teenagers are almost always unhappy and stressed out. And a big reason is that they feel like they deserve as much freedom as an adult. In their minds, they are just as good as making decisions as adults are. So they just very unhappy that and frustrated that they're not being given that freedom. So basic point being that when you're highly control seeking, you're going to evoke a lot of psychological reactance in other people who would not like your desire for control. And so you can basically have control over others, or you can have their love and their um, true kind of genuine positive feeling towards you. When you try to control them, they won't really like you. So because liking is very, very important, relationships are very, very important for happiness. That's another reason why being highly control seeking is not very good for happiness. And there's a third reason, I'll just very briefly touch on this, but the third reason why being control seeking lowers happiness has to do with the kinds of decisions that we make. When you're highly control seeking, you want to achieve this outcome, right? You want to eat at this Italian restaurant, damn it, and you're going to somehow persuade everybody in your family or in your group to choose the Italian restaurant. You're going to engage in kind of cutting corners or some risky behaviors, some not very ethical behaviors. You might start to manipulate people. You might start to lie to people, going to one group and saying, hey, that group wants to go to an Italian restaurant. Okay, let's just go to this Italian restaurant, even though the other group might not have really wanted to go to the Italian restaurant and so on. So there's a tendency among people high in desire for control to engage in risky behavior. They're more likely to drink a lot. They're more likely to gamble a lot. They're more likely to drive in a more dangerous manner on the roads and so on and so forth. And all of those things, again, lower happiness in the long run. Okay, so I've talked about three big reasons why, if you're not careful, if you become successful, far from increasing your happiness, which is what we've all been told, right? Be successful so that you can be happy. It can actually lower our happiness levels, which is why we see a lot of people who have achieved a lot, who are rich, who are wealthy, who are probably high in status and power, etc., but still are not really happy, right? When you look at their life, they might even have a lot of health problems as a result of that unhappiness, or they might have gone through a couple of divorces and so on and so forth because of these problems with happiness, right? So, how do we avoid this happiness self-sabotage? Okay, so I want to talk very briefly about three big things you can do. One is to, instead of chasing superiority as you become successful, just to remind yourself as you're going through your career and as you're becoming increasingly successful, to recognize that the true determinant of your success is actually pursuit of flow, as it's called, right? So when we do a task and we are really into the task, when we really like the task and we are engaged with the task and we love our job, that is what determines our success. It's not chasing superiority. It's not wanting to be better than the other person. It is not wanting to be richer than the other person that leads to success, right? That can motivate you to want to be successful. But really, until you actually do a good job, you're not going to be promoted, right? So, what determines doing a good job? What determines doing a good job? The more reliable determinant of that is pursuit of flow, of doing something that you find to be interesting, that you like to do. That is what is going to lead to ultimately, especially in the long run, right? Lead to success rather than chasing superiority. So just to remind yourself of that can mitigate the tendency to seek superiority. The second sin, right, as I call it, that smart people or successful people sometimes might commit, which is to deprioritize relationships. So as you go along your career, I think it's very important to remind yourself to invest in your relationships, right? And one of the ways in which I do it, and I'm lucky because I'm a professor, so I know my calendar a year in advance often, right? So I know exactly when I'm teaching, what days of the week, what times of the day, etc. So I know where my free slots are and I know where my vacations are when the vacations are coming up. So I can easily coordinate with other people, including my parents, for example, or good friends, to plan vacations. Even if they cannot commit, right? I can tell them, I'll come over. You live in New York City, I'll come over and I'll just hang out for Christmas. Even though you may not know for sure if you can go anywhere, I can come to you because I know my calendar is free at that point. So prioritizing relationships becomes increasingly important as one grows older. This is particularly true for men. Men turn out to be more lonely past their 50s and 60s, much more than women. Women are better at investing in relationships, having a group of friends that they can chat with, even if not in person on WhatsApp or on social media. But men tend to be more likely to isolate themselves in the pursuit of their career success. And so that's a mistake that you want to avoid and try and avoid it early. And so, on a yearly basis, every year, you should be taking a vacation with your friends, right? You should be making sure that you go out and hang out with your family and go out with your kids for dinners, etc. By the way, a lot of this is very American centric. I know that Mexico is very similar to India. We love family, we love food, we love music, we love dancing, we love getting together. Every time I've come to Mexico City or to other parts of Mexico, I always see a lot of, like people out on the streets enjoying and socializing. So this may not apply that much to Mexico as much as it applies to the United States. But having said that, even in these countries like India and Mexico and Philippines and Indonesia, a lot of these places where family is very important, I still see that the younger generation is getting sucked into social media. That is killing the in-person intimacy and relationship. So something to watch out for sure. Okay. I want to show you all a quick video here, which is one of my favorite advertisements from Thailand. Okay. Let's take a look at it and I'll talk a little bit about the relevance of this ad for our topic.
เขาจะได้อะไรถ้าเขาทำแบบนี้ทุกวันเขาจะไม่ได้อะไรเลยไม่ได้รวยขึ้นไม่ได้ออกทีวีไม่มีใครรู้จักไม่ได้มีชื่อเสียงที่มากขึ้นเพราะสิ่งที่เขาได้คือได้แค่ความรู้สึกได้เห็นความสุขได้เข้าใจได้ความรักได้ในสิ่งที่เงินซื้อไม่ได้ได้โลกที่สวยงามกว่าเดิมในชีวิตคุณอะไรคือสิ่งที่คุณต้องการมากที่สุดไทยประกันชีวิตเชื่อในความดี
So yeah, I every time I look at this ad, I just get moved by it. And the reason why I'm showing it is because when we think about investing in relationships, we typically think about our own close family and friends, and that's good, right? But I think that it's broader than that. As human beings, we are capable of caring for not just our closest friends and family, right? We are capable of caring for really the entire planet. And so, in fact, I would say that it goes beyond just even other human beings. It goes to other animals and plants and environment and the future generations that we don't even know who they're going to be, etc. So our heart is so big, we are capable of showing love and compassion much beyond just our own immediate circle. And I just wanted to show you this ad because this guy, even though he doesn't have a lot of money, it's of course an advertisement, right? So you have to take it with a pinch of salt, but it moves us because, it really is very emotional because we can see the truth that even if you don't have a lot of wealth and resources, if you're kind to other people, you can see how that enhances other people's positivity and their happiness and their well-being, and that in turn kind of comes back to uplift you as the person who's doing these. And so I just want to kind of like put that thought out there that when it comes to relationships, it's not just necessarily about our closest friends and family, it's about entire humanity, in fact, even beyond it. Okay, so that's the recommendation, is to reprioritize relationships. And the last one, what is the antidote to being overly control seeking? So when we think about control, and all of us do need control, right? We need some level of predictability of the future. We need some level of assurance that we are going to be taken care of, and that happens when other people obey us, or when we have money to be able to decide where we want to eat or how we want to travel, and so on and so forth. So all that control is good, but it's also important to practice what I call internal control, right? Internal control is control over your own emotions, over your own thoughts, over your own behaviors. And when you have a sufficiently high level of internal control, your happiness kind of lies in your hands, right? So your happiness doesn't depend so much on the external outcomes, whether somebody praises you, for example, or you get that promotion, or you get to live in a particular kind of city or in a particular house, or when you go on a vacation, whether the weather is beautiful, right? Your happiness depends much more on how you choose to interpret things. Okay, and this is a huge topic, right? And all of you are a little bit older than my, undergraduate students, and I'm sure that you all are familiar with this idea that the same exact situation, right, can evoke such different emotions in people, right? There's this kind of funny, not funny, I mean, it's a really insightful thought experiment, right? Imagine you go to a bank one day and suddenly there are some robbers in the bank, and they close all the doors and they say, don't, nobody move. We're going to kill you if you do anything stupid. We just want to steal money. And then just to kind of warn everyone that they're serious, they shoot a bullet in the air, right? And the bullet kind of hits the ceiling and a wall, and then kind of, comes and lodges itself in your thigh, right? It hits your thigh and it hurts like crazy. It hurts. It goes into your thigh, right? And then, the robbers are gone, right? They steal the money and they're gone. After the incident is over, right? If you think about it, do you think that you were lucky or do you think that you were unlucky? Right? That's the question. And you can really look at that example or that situation, and you can easily come up with reasons why you could consider yourself to be unlucky because of all the people in the bank. It had to choose you and your thigh to hit, right? But you can also come up with reasons why you're lucky. It could have hit your heart, right? It could have hit, maybe you're with your child and it could have hit the child, right? But it did not do that. It hit your thigh. Okay, so how you interpret things that happen in your life, whether you view, like they say in English, you view the glass as being half full or half empty, can make a big difference to your emotions. And the idea here is to practice the ability to control, and well, control is the wrong word, I think, maybe self-regulate, to regulate your own emotions. And once you do that, then you can pretty much have your emotions under your control, right? You can be at least equanimous, at least peaceful, at least kind of emotionally stable, if not happy, regardless of what happens outside of you. And so that's the idea. Rather than seeking control over other people and over outcomes, you start to seek control or seek the ability to regulate your own emotions. Okay, so I've talked about a lot of things. Thank you very much for listening to me. In just a minute, I'll just very quickly summarize everything that I've talked about. Started out with this idea that most of us believe that success is going to make us happy. In fact, there is a lot of research showing the opposite is true. Happiness increases success. So it's very important to prioritize happiness. That's a big lesson. And the second big theme that I talked about is this idea that if you're not careful, success, far from improving our happiness levels, can actually lower our happiness levels. I talked about three reasons why this might be so. You become more egotistical, you might become superiority seeking, you become more selfish, you become more mean to other people, right? And finally, you seek too much control. And so, the way to avoid these is by focusing on the things that truly determine your success, right? Which is to focus on flow, finding flow at work, and do things that are interesting to you rather than comparing yourself to other people. It's by prioritizing relationships, investing in relationships, and finally seeking this internal control or ability to regulate your own emotions. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much again for inviting me and for listening to me. I really appreciate it.
No,
I'd like to open it up for questions.
sure. Pues por favor, si quieren hacer alguna pregunta en vivo, levanten la mano. Si no se atreven a hacerla en inglés, nos la pueden escribir en el chat y yo se la traduzco al doctor Rash. Y les vamos a pedir que no se desconecten porque terminando las preguntas y respuestas les vamos a dar un aviso parroquial. Entonces, si quieren levantar la mano o escribir sus preguntas, ahora es cuando. So we have one comment in the chat
Mhm.
from Adriana Trujillo that says, "Thank you for sharing important messages. Sometimes I've acted similar to the young man in the video, and it is
Mm.
very gratifying when I've seen that the other person has prospered and or acts with joy in what they do in their life. I haven't been able to do that much as I would like, but the day will come. Thank you."
Very good. Very good. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Adriana.
Please.
Raj, thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. And that video, it made me cry, basically.
Yeah. Especially that little child, educating the
Yes,
child. Yeah.
it's really impactful. And I was wondering if there's any educational model you are familiar with out there in the world that is actually taking into consideration this conditioning, because this conditioning that you were talking about comes from even when we start school very early on, right? So are you familiar with any educational model out there in the world that is trying to correct or trying different things to get children to value or prioritize being happy instead of this competitiveness and success in a monetary or conventional way as we know it?
Yeah, the government of the state of Delhi in India, Delhi, as you might know, is the New Delhi is the capital of India. That is located in the state. It's a city state. So that government has been in their schools in India. There's a lot of government schools, right, which is free. Those schools, they have happiness as a topic, that right from the very lowest grade, first grade, all the way up to 12th grade, just like you have physics or chemistry or mathematics, they have happiness. And it's really made a big difference, in terms of more children wanting to come to school and staying in school, and even going back and educating their parents about happiness and importance of happiness and so on. So the thing is, it's interesting, right? I mean, why do our parents and other people who really mean well for us, and even our educational system, tends to focus more on success and becoming wealthy and becoming, powerful, etc. Um, Even though it may not lead to happiness, and happiness, if it's prioritized, actually increases our chances of success, right? Why has this been the case? And I think that you can make the argument that back in our evolutionary past as human beings, right? Say certainly 2000 years ago, but even up to 200 years ago, vast majority of us did not have access to food, right? And this is probably true even now. Maybe over 50% in the world do not have access to 3 meals a day. But certainly everyone in this group has, and there's many, many more people now than before who have access to basic needs and necessities now, right? So if you think about a situation in which you're out in the savannas of Africa, you're in a cave, you're part of a small tribe, and other tribes are, wanting to steal your food and maybe even kill you so that they can take your land. In that situation, you can argue that all of these things, conventional yardsticks of success, right? Becoming wealthy, becoming more powerful, becoming more famous, can actually help you survive more, right? If you're the chief of the village, you're probably going to survive because everyone's going to want to protect you. The uh, situation has completely changed now, right? We are no longer in the fight for survival because, we don't have to. Our survival is taken for granted. And this is a very new thing for human beings, right? In our kind of hundreds of thousands of years of existence as a species, it's only in the last, I would say, 50, 60 years that more than a, billion people no longer have to worry about survival anymore, right? A huge percentage of people don't have to. It's very strange. But yet, our genetic propensity, our psychology, our way we are hardwired is still in the past, and so it's very difficult to suddenly change your attitude towards things. It still means a lot to us when we are given an award and when we are the number one and when we are promoted and when we get more likes on Facebook. It just feels better because back in the day that mattered because that could make a difference to your survival. It doesn't anymore, but you can't convince your unconscious mind about all of these things, right? So that's the thing. I think that ultimately we need to kind of change from the unconscious level or genetic makeup, and for that to happen, you need the constant reminder that, hey, it doesn't really matter if, you get an angry email from somebody. It's not going to kill you. It doesn't matter if the taxes are due and you're a little bit late. It doesn't matter if you miss a meeting by a little bit. It doesn't matter if you do a bad job in a presentation. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to take your life. And so reminding ourselves constantly of these things and practicing things that make us flourish and have what I call a positivity mindset or an abundance mindset becomes very, very important because we're all rooted in scarcity orientation because of an evolutionary past. Anyway, long answer to your question, but hopefully that made some sense.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Mhm. All right.
Okay, any other questions? Now is the time.
Or forever stay silent.
Okay,
All
well,
right.
thank you very much,
Yeah, of
Raj.
course.
It was
Yeah,
an amazing talk, so thank you very much.
absolutely. Thank you very much for inviting me. Take care, guys, and see you next time.
Y pues por favor no se desconecten, como les dije, les vamos a hacer un anuncio parroquial. Entonces, primero que nada les presento a Tiziana Cuatrochiocchi. Ella está como directora de Outreach en el Centro de Empresas Conscientes del TEC y nos va a hablar de un curso que tienen próximamente que creemos que es de muchísimo interés para todos ustedes. La mayoría de los champions ya lo conocen, pero creo que vale la pena que escuchen la explicación que nos tiene Tiz. Entonces, Tiz, si quieres compartir.
Claro, denme un segundito. Y si me dejan saber si ya todos